Deathworlders to the Extreme by Aquastar Dark. Chapter 12 Rocks and Misunderstandings. Shinzo has an idea, and Aizawa experiences a misunderstanding. Hitoshi blinked as the cat alien started tapping and grasping at the edge of the crack as if trying to pull it open with one paw. It looked at him for a moment as he stuffed what was left of the dry meal packet into his mouth. He could really go for some water right about now. Before turning away and returning to its task. I guess it's trying to get me out, and since it was walking around earlier, maybe it thinks that this is the only way for me to get out? With the contents of the metal packet stuffed in his cheek, Hitoshi grasped at the inner layer of the metal at the edge of the crack and pulled at it. It inched towards Hitoshi with a creak, but the second time he gave it a tug, a shudder ran through the ship. So I can't pull it too far. Wait! Shoving a hand into his pocket, Hitoshi produced the sharp rock he stuffed in there earlier. It wasn't exactly ideal for hitting, actually. Doing so would likely damage the sharp end, and since Hitoshi really doubted he'd be able to pull another rock like it, he didn't want to risk damaging it to the point he could use it, like earlier. But Hitoshi waved a hand at the cat alien, which pinned back its ears as it paused its work, staring at him. Well, that's new. Having successfully gotten the cat alien's attention, Hitoshi gestured to the sharp rock, and once he made sure the cat alien's view were on it, he made a motion to resemble something round before gesturing at the rock again and repeating the motion. It took multiple tries before the cat alien seemed to figure out what he was asking for, and its eyes lit up for a moment. Like, literally, before it turned from Hitoshi and wandered off into the surrounding area. It was mesmerizing, Hitoshi found, to watch the rather nervous cat alien move through the rubble, its ears often flicking and its head often being raised to glance at the surrounding trees. Its tail flicking, its scarf was untangled from its usual place around the cat alien's neck, and was instead hovering just above the ground like a metal detector as the cat alien searched for some sort of rock Hitoshi requested. Hitoshi shuddered and closed his eyes as a near-silent creak reverberated through the metal around him, sending minuscule pieces of debris raining down on his head. Not altogether dissimilar from the silver and metal that fell in his eye earlier. Hitoshi couldn't help but gasp when he felt something slightly larger piece of metal streak past his ear and bounce off his shoulder, leaving a streak of blood in its wake. The cut was shallow, not deep enough to need stitches, stung, and it was long enough not altogether like cat alien scratches. Honestly. So Hitoshi relaxed. That cat alien apparently did not, as when Hitoshi opened his eyes to survey the damage the tremor had done, he discovered that the cat alien at the entrance of the crack, its ears pinned back as it meowed at him. Eyes focused on his cut, its scarf shot out to grab at the Hitoshi's hand when it reached to brush a hand against the cut where the blood had begun to rise to the surface. The red liquid dripped down the side of Hitoshi's face, and the cat alien whined at him as it pressed its scarf to the cut, the white fleshed fabric creating a numbing effect on the wound. Thanks, Hitoshi muttered, rubbing a finger against the scarf before sighing as he raised the sharp rock and stared at the cat alien expectantly. It chuffed at him, ears pinned, before suddenly Hitoshi found himself blindfolded by the scarf wrapping itself around his face. Surprised by the sudden block to his sight, Hitoshi did the first thing that came to his mind. Lick the scarf. Quick enough to draw blood from the tip of Hitoshi's tongue, the scarf sprung back as the cat alien stepped back, fur raised as it stared at him. Realizing his mistake, Hitoshi playsatingly lifted his hands, but accidentally seemed to frighten the cat alien further as it stepped back from him, staring. Crap, I didn't mean to freak it out. It must have thought I was going to eat it. How do I fix this? Hitoshi glanced at the retreating cat. It seemed to understand animal noises, or at least cat ones, right? Shota hadn't expected the deathworlder to be a creature that would store food in its body for later, but it seemed that was the case as it stuffed a large chunk of meal pack into the portion of its mouth that was between its teeth and skin. The action only distracted him for a moment, however, before he returned to his task of trying to pry open the crack a little more. Creak, creak. Hitoshi's head shot up from his task as he found the deathworlder doing exactly as he'd been doing on its side, only for the action to result in a slight tremor reverberating through the ship that stopped the deathworlder in its task. At least it understands that much about its safety, thought Shota as he continued on with his task. At least I can do something from my end, still. The sudden movement of the deathworlder shaking an open hand at Shota rocked him out of his trance of his work, and he froze, staring at the action with ears pinned back. What is that? Is it threatening me? I'm working as fast as I can. He felt his heart quicken for a moment before the deathworlder evidently got distracted and started to shift its hand toward a rock object in its hand. A rock, before shifting its hand into shape like a scoop before hovering them above each other, one upside down. What does it want with the rock, and why is it making the motion with its hands? Shota pondered as the deathworlder repeated the motions. Let's see. Clearly it wants something with the rock, and it's making a shape like overlapping scoops. But no, what would it want with scoops while trapped? Once again, it repeated the motions. Wait, the second shape is round. Maybe it wants me to find a round rock? A sudden clarity overcame Shoto's mind as he understood, eyes lighting up. It wants me to bash the edges of the crack with the round rock. Taking a second to glance over the deathworlder to make sure it would be all right, Shota began to wander around the wreckage site, keeping close to the ship and watching the trees for any predators. He could feel his tail flick with every unrecognizable sound as he searched for what the deathworlder had requested, using the tiny spines on his capture scarf to search even while he was looking for threats. Using tools like that and communicating without words, it's no doubt the deathworlder sapient. Shota scowled. There might even be more deathworlds like that out there, sentient or even sapient, that might have been ignored due to their dangerous nature. It's as though the worlds were not even explored at all. Shota hissed a vicious curse. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even explore and simply assumed all deathworlders would be simple creatures due to how dangerous they are. Or worse, downright ignoring it. That's just like the HPSC to creak. Shota's internal net was cut off before it really began when the soft creak reverberated from the ship, followed by a sudden burst of breath from the deathworlder. The head pain racing through his body as Shota leapt past and over debris to the crack in the ship. The trembling body of the deathworlder, surrounded by debris, had Shota's ears plummeting as he watched the young creature cup a wound on the side of its head, red blood trickling between its fingers. No! Shota cursed, fear slashing into his thoughts as he stared at the head wound. Who knows how long it'll take to heal, or what kind of damage that cut could do? The deathworlder's eyes widened when it saw him, and from the way its hand fell from the wound, Shota could tell it was surprised. It's okay. You're going to be okay. He meowed comfortingly, despite the deathworlder having no idea what he was saying. We'll get you out of here. We'll get you out of there and bandage that up, okay? He was lying. He knew that the deathworlders' chances were slim, particularly considering he was both trapped and suffering from a head wound that typically had victims bleeding out within half a rotation. Is it trying to get its wound infected? Is it trying to get its wound infected? His scarf only just blocked the deathworlder from touching its wound once again, and blood trickled down, leaving red in its wake. Pathologically as he could, Shoto whined at the deathworlder to try to communicate his concern as he wrapped its head in his scarf. An action that the deathworlder did not resist. It muttered something as he pressed and pinned into Shoto's scarf as though it wasn't badly injured. It lifted a sharp rock and gave Shoto a look that he could easily translate as, "Did you get what you wanted or not?" Wrong priorities. Shoto let out a scolding chuff as he loosely covered the entirety of the deathworlder's head. Maybe it'll let itself relax. Shoto spun back, scarf closed as he stared at the deathworlder with shock. It tried to eat my scarf? He didn't know what had happened to change the deathworlder's behavior, so he stepped back to its raised claws. He couldn't help but wonder if this behavior was new. It acted aggressive earlier, but I ignored its behavior as different culture. Did it only want to eat me this entire time? Wind drifted through Shota's raised fur as he and the deathworlder stared at each other down. The tension of his body made agony rise from his bones, but he refused to let that force him down. Just an instinctive reaction to having its mouth covered? Shota hoped. Maybe the aggression is from blood being drawn from its wound. Maybe it didn't want its face covered? Is this change in behavior my fault? The deathworlder watched him as he backed away from it, and then suddenly something peculiar happened. It whined. The whine wasn't like the one that the deathworlder had released earlier, no. This one was far more animalistic, far meeker, and more much like a kitten. Then it meowed, and reaching arms through crack as it repeated the sting sound of a pleading kitten. What is it? How is it? Is this deathworlder younger than I thought? Shota could only stare frozen as the deathworlder cried out with him with calls nearly identical to that of a kitten. Are these sounds of emotional distress? Guilt plagued Shota as the idea that perhaps he'd overreacted. No, the deathworlder had tried to eat him, but had it? It only licked my scarf. Is that how it species to affection? Or maybe it was only being silly. The calls wavered as the deathworlder stared at him with wide eyes. If that's true, then I rejected it as being what? Friendly? Meows and whines drifted off, the deathworlder staring at him, and Shota's ears twinged as a slight red hue overcame the deathworlder's cheeks. Red. Like it's blood. If blood was rushing to the deathworlder's wounds, well, whether or not Shota could figure out its intentions, he would never get the chance. As quickly as he dared, Shota approached the deathworlder, and it perked up, red beginning to fade. That's odd. A sudden, horrifying, and terribly sad thought occurred to Shota. Does its species purposely send blood to its wound when upset to hurt themselves? Did the deathworlder just try to do the same? Because gently, Shota cooed and let his captor scarf drift as carefully as he could to the deathworlder, which froze at the closest as the scarf wrapped itself tightly around the deathworlder's wound. It chirped something at Shota, its head tilted, and satisfied that he wasn't trying to eat him, Shota continued on his mission, though he made sure to keep half an eye on the deathworlder at all times. Chapter 13. Freedom. Time is running short, and Aizawa looks for rocks. Hitoshi was beyond relieved to find out that his efforts were not for naught, because the embarrassment that flooded through him was far more than what he felt when random strangers found him meowing back at cats on the street. Fortunately, after a minute or two, the cat alien seemed much calmer and even stuck its scarf back in its cut. Something Hitoshi was incredibly grateful for, as the numbing sensation was a relief he was incredibly grateful to have. Sadly, the cat alien still seemed slightly wary of him. He caught it glancing at him out of the corner of his eye. This meant he couldn't take the opportunity to wrap its scarf around his ankle, which still pulsed pleasantly with every heartbeat. It had been, few hours since Hitoshi had gotten stuck? The sun had risen significantly already, but it wasn't near as hot as yesterday, despite the fact Hitoshi was sitting crouched in a metal death trap. Over this time, at the very least, Hitoshi's ankle hurt slightly less from the stinging all of that time. He rubbed a gentle hand over the minuscule, numbness-inducing bristles on the scarf that were so small and thin they might as well have been pieces of hair. The end of the scarf rippled in response to his pats, the part around his head not loosening in the slightest as he did. I wonder why the Catling was so worried by my cut. I mean, it's not like it's bad at all. Toshi tried to sneak a hand under the scarf to feel the cut in case it's already scabbed over, but the scarf only tightened. Toshi didn't add any more pressure to get what he wanted because the scarf, it didn't actually feel like it was anything particularly difficult to break. Not altogether unlike the thin scarf made of something like loose cotton or just skin. Toshi was sure that if he really tried, he could rip it in half. But he would not be doing that. For one thing, he didn't doubt it would hurt the cat alien, since being able to move things with it suggests his nerves, which meant pain. Second of all, he didn't want to risk scarring the cat alien like it did earlier. Either, it froze when he waved at it, likely caught off guard by the fact that Hitoshi had seen it glancing at him. Was it unnecessary and possible making the cat alien nervous? Probably. But honestly, it was better to let it know when Hitoshi was aware of its presence, so it wouldn't be caught off guard later at more crucial times. Another shudder throughout the wreck made Hitoshi duck, closing his eyes and holding his arms over his head and the scarf. Now that I think about it, though, this is a bit of a crucial time. Hitoshi laughed nervously, and when he opened his eyes, he saw the cat alien glancing at him and ears swiveling. I really hope it finds that rock soon. I don't know how much longer I have until the whole thing collapses on me. Hitoshi took in a shuddering breath and held it for a moment in which the cat alien suddenly froze, staring at him with ears pinned to his head. He released the breath, and instantly the cat alien relaxed as though it's been listening to his breathing. Hitoshi wasn't altogether sure what to make of that. Most of his foster parents never bothered to be so attentive with Hitoshi, and when they did, they usually had some sort of ulterior motive, like making sure he wasn't out causing trouble or too damaged to sell, or that kind of thing. To be honest, he couldn't say he hated that kind of attention in this context. So far away from, well, not home, but certainly away from familiarity. I wonder if it'll get to see Bastard again. The thought was so out of context and so out of place that a burst of laughter leapt from Hitoshi's throat, making the cat alien's ears twitch. Yeah, I don't think the cat alien and Bastard will get along too great, especially considering how nervous the cat alien is all the time. A sudden thought occurred to Hitoshi. Wait, I've given the cat alien that tried to eat me a name, but not the one that's trying to help me. Well, that's not right. Hitoshi tapped his chin. I'd better choose something descriptive so I don't forget. Black? Nah, that might get confusing. Scarf? Wait, no, that's what I called the scarf itself. Hitoshi blew away a stray piece of hair that had fallen in his head. hair as he thought, making the scarf twitch in response to the cold air. Suddenly, a brief memory came to mind of a line of eraser heads he used to buy were centered around animals wearing clothes. One of which was a black cat wearing a white scarf. Otoshi snorted, and the cat alien's tail switched behind it. Huh, calling the cat alien a racerhead. Yeah, I'd remember that, but it's too long. It's too long. Toshi smiled triumphantly for a moment before realizing that action had made the cat alien freeze and stared at him. Thinking fast, he mewed at it, and the cat alien shook its head. Racerhead's too long, so maybe I'm just gonna call it a racer. Racer suddenly perked up in his because Hitoshi had been calling him in it for so long, and honestly, if Bastard gets to have a gender, then a racer should have one too. Sergeant ducked down to pick something off the ground. He held it in the air, looking at Hitoshi for approval. It was a medium-sized rock, surrounded like he'd been tossed in a river or ocean, and looked absolutely perfect for increasing the size of a crack. Hitoshi held a hand out into the sunlight to show his approval, and Eraser purred as he handed the rock back to Hitoshi. Hitoshi hesitated for a moment before carefully yet firmly unwinding Eraser's scarf from his head, ignoring the cat's whines of protest as he shoved the scarf out of the crack. He touched a finger into the dry blood and scabbed cut and nodded, satisfied before glancing between the rock and the crack. Then he began to bash the walls of the crack. The Deathworlder was loud and very expressive. Shota found as he searched for good rock for the Deathworld to use as a tool of freedom. It made small sounds like a cross between stress, breathing, and barks. It made sounds like a mix of barks and chatterings. It made sound like a regular kitten would. Basically, it was just as vocal as kits that Shota had seen on his travel as a hero. He had no doubt that the Deathworlder was young, but this only added to the evidence that he was a kid as well. That was a stress and a burden that Shota didn't think he could bear to handle. Not when he'd barely been able to take care of himself on this planet. If anything, I doubt the Death World would be taking care of me in this kind of environment. There were, of course, behaviors that only increased Shota's worry for the Death Worlder. Its breaths that were held in far too long like it was struggling to breathe. Those were a significant example that had Shota freezing. They were a significant example that Hitoshi had Shota freezing in terror that all his efforts might be for nothing and that the Deathworlder would die anyway. The way the Deathworlder bared its teeth, sometimes even at nothing. Fortunately, it seemed to notice that Shota wasn't comfortable with it baring its teeth, and seemed ready to tuck it away when it noticed. Something that suggested that the Deathworlder baring his teeth wasn't an act of aggression. It was an oddity, of course, but considering that the Deathworlder wasn't even supposed to be sentient at the very least, Shota could justify in having having a hypothesis, or two. Sorry, speech impediment. Maybe I can try to keep a record for my experiences with the Deathworlder. It could be helpful in the future for recognizing behavioral patterns. I'm pretty sure I have a spare voice recorder or two hiding in my supply pouches. The sound, solid gray of a rock, exactly like Shota had been looking for, had the Vimu light up with delight as he picked it up and presented it to the sky, where the Deathworlder could clearly see. It reached out a hand, and Shota chuffed with amusement at the Deathworlder's obvious approval of the tool. Definitely tool users. I wonder how far in development its species gotten. What he didn't expect, however, was for the Deathworlder to easily unwrap his scarf from its head, despite Shota putting all his strength into making it stay, and despite Shota whines of protest, it only discovered that the wound had stopped bleeding. And not even that, the blood had frozen into a solid that closed the cut from the outside world and protected it from infection. How is that possible? Usually it takes an entire rotation for blood to solidify, especially when on a body that's still alive. Shoulda watched entranced as the Death Worlder traced the dried blood with the appendages on his hand before holding its new rock in his hand and beginning to attack the side of the crack. It was obvious the Death Worlder knew what he was doing as he slowly but surely increased the speed and strength of the hits it made against the crack using the rock. Increasing the space and size, it hesitated for a moment when a shudder raced through the wreckage. But only for a moment, as he continued despite the groans of weakness from the ship and whines of protest from Shota. It's like it wants to die. Memories of what had occurred earlier washed over Shota, and he couldn't help but wonder for a moment that it was his fault, although he tried to shake that away as quickly as he could. It's under stress. Me adding that, it's under stress. Me adding that to earlier didn't help much, but fundamentally, it is not my fault. But fundamentally, it's not my fault. The logic helped as he scolded himself, but it didn't do much to combat the guilt that rose anyway. Pushing his students and putting the stress on them was often Shota did to encourage them, make them stronger. But in this situation, that was not at all what was needed. It was not at all something he wanted to grow in his Death Worlder when all they had to survive was each other and what meager supplies they had managed to scrunch. Considering that the Death Worlder had already exhibited concerning behaviors from stress, shouldn't doubt that for the Death Worlder, stress was something more likely to do it in, if anything. Clank! A particularly hard hit to the wall sent bits of debris raining down on the Death Worlder, but it only tucked its face into its garment as it continues to clash the wall. Continuing the onslaught of debris that continued to fall, Shota could only stare in horror as the Death Worlder raced against time as the stability of the ship grew more and more fragile with every crack and every hit against its walls. And Shota whined, stepping back as one piece grazed the side of the Death Worlder's head, making it hiss for a moment in its hesitation. It won't help if it's stressed, but maybe. Shota purred to the Death Worlder as loud as he could so that it could hear him and receive what little comfort Shota's purrs of poorly disguised worry held. Clank, clank! A large piece of debris hit the side of the wall within the ship before falling to the floor in a sound that made the Death Worlder's eyes shoot open at the sound, giving the swirling debris a chance to make it hasten to its eyes. It keened as it shot its eyes closed, now slamming the rocks against the clink with more desperation than anything else at this point. Shota's purrs rose in intensity for the little Death Worlder that was doing all it could to survive, while Shota couldn't do much at the moment, could he? It keened again, this time crying softly as it blindly attacked the ship. Right, it's blind right now. At this point, the crack looked nearly large enough for the Death Worlder to make it through if he went sideways. But if the Death Worlder didn't know that, the baby talk of Shota's species obviously caught its attention, and risking just a moment to tap the Death Worlder with his scarf among the debris, Shota called for the Death Worlder once more. Its hand went wide as he felt around the edges of the crack before it began to slide through, hissing as new cuts sprouted on its hand from the multiple sharp points in the crack opening just as more of the ship began to collapse on the inside. And then it was out, gentler than he thought he'd been with his students. Gentler than he'd been with his students, though certainly much more careful than he'd been with most criminals. Shota swiftly guided the Death Worlder away from the collapsing wreckage, wrapping the scarf around the Death Worlder's head and its new wound as well. It keened and pawed at whatever piece of his body it could feel. Shota will alone will alone was all that kept him from whimpering when it gripped at his broken arm for just a moment. And leaned against Shota with eyes closed, liquid pouring from its eyes. Shota's ears drooped when he noticed the liquid. It was like nothing he had ever seen before as it poured from the deathworlders' closed eyes, and between all the deathworlders' signs of distress, he couldn't be sure if this was one. Soon they found themselves standing between the tree that the deathworlder had laid in only a few words had been in the deathworlder had laid in only a few words. Had it only really been a few words ago, and he gently guided it to lay the base of the tree. Shota froze suddenly as he felt the deathworlder's arms wrap around his body in a movement that he couldn't be sure wasn't aggressive, until the rough, incredibly creepy purrs of the deathworlder rang through its body, followed by a whimpered chatter. Though Shota couldn't understand what it was saying, he'd been on enough rescue missions to understand the basics of what it was trying to communicate. Thank you.